The sound of laughter had always haunted Elena Lawson. It wasn't the kind of laughter that came from joy. It was sharp, bitter, and cruel, the kind that cut deeper than words ever could. Every time her Aunt Margaret threw her head back and laughed, Elena felt like she was shrinking. She remembered the first time she heard that laugh directed at her, the day she moved into her aunt's house at 16. Her parents had just died in a car accident, and Elena stood in the doorway with her small duffel bag, her clothes still smelling faintly of smoke from the wreckage. Her aunt looked her up and down, her red nails tapping the doorframe. "You poor thing," Margaret said flatly. "Well, come in. We'll find a place for you, though I hope you're not expecting much. Things are tight." It was never really about space or money. Margaret's house had 6 bedrooms and marble floors, but she made sure Elena knew she didn't belong there. Elena grew up watching her cousin Lila twirl around in expensive dresses while she wore old clothes passed down from charity boxes. When guests came over, Margaret would smile sweetly and say, "This is my niece Elena. She's staying with us for now." For now. Those 2 words always echoed in Elena's mind. They made her feel temporary, like she was a guest in her own bloodline. Every day she worked harder to prove herself. She took extra shifts at the library after school, cleaned up around the house, cooked when the maid didn't show. She thought that maybe, just maybe, if she stayed quiet and worked hard, her aunt would see her differently. But Margaret didn't want to see her differently. She wanted her gone. One evening, when Elena was 18, she came home with excitement glowing in her eyes. She had just received her acceptance letter to a university business program, a scholarship no less. She rushed into the kitchen, holding the letter in her trembling hands. "Aunt Margaret, I got in, full scholarship." Margaret looked up from her glass of wine, barely impressed. "Oh, that's nice, but who's going to pay for your food and books? Scholarships don't cover everything, you know." "I'll get a part-time job," Elena said quickly, her heart racing. "I'll make it work." Lila, lounging on the counter scrolling through her phone, smirked. "A job? How? Adorable. Maybe you can be a waitress at my boyfriend's cafe. He's always looking for help." They both laughed. That same cruel laughter. Elena felt her stomach twist, but she forced a smile. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Months turned into years. University wasn't easy, but Elena managed. She worked late nights at coffee shops, cleaned apartments on weekends, and studied in between shifts. Every phone call home was the same, Margaret reminding her of what she owed them for taking her in, and Lila bragging about her shopping sprees and trips abroad. By the time Elena graduated, she had saved just enough to rent a tiny apartment in the city. It was small, 1 room, 1 window, but it was hers. She framed her diploma on the wall, right above her desk. It was the first time she looked at something and thought, "I did this, on my own." But success didn't come easy. She applied for dozens of jobs and faced rejections one after another. No connections, no family backing, no one to open doors for her. Every time she failed, Margaret's voice echoed in her mind, "You'll never make it past a receptionist's desk." So Elena worked harder. She studied business, real estate, finance, anything she could get her hands on. She offered to work for free just to learn. Her nights were filled with sleepless hours, her mornings with coffee and determination. Then came the night that changed everything. It was her cousin's engagement party. Lila was marrying into a wealthy family, and the entire house buzzed with arrogance and champagne. Elena attended only because she thought it might bring some peace, a gesture of goodwill, perhaps. When she arrived, she instantly regretted it. Margaret's eyes widened as if she'd seen a ghost. "Oh, you came," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Well, I suppose we can make room for one more. Though it's not exactly your crowd, is it?" Lila giggled. "You look nice, Elena. Did you borrow that dress?" Elena bit her tongue and said nothing. Later that evening, as laughter filled the hall, she overheard Margaret speaking to one of her friends. "She's still trying, poor thing. She thinks hard work will make her rich. Bless her heart. She doesn't realize some people just aren't born for success." Elena's chest tightened. That same laughter, the one that once haunted her as a child, echoed again. Something inside her broke that night, Or maybe something finally woke up. After the party, as rain poured down and her heels clicked against the pavement, Elena whispered to herself, "One day, they'll see me. One day, I won't need their approval." That night, she started drafting a plan, not out of revenge, but out of resolve. She listed every goal, build something of her own. Never depend on anyone again. Prove, not to them, but to herself, that she was worth more than their laughter. She didn't know how or when, but she knew she would rise. A year later, Margaret called her unexpectedly. "Elena, dear," she said in a tone thick with fake sweetness, "we've decided to rent out your old room. You can collect your things before the weekend." That was it. No warmth, no gratitude. Just an eviction from the only place that had once felt remotely like home. Elena didn't argue. She went there quietly, packed her small box of memories, her mother's necklace, her father's old watch, and a few photographs. As she walked out, Lila leaned against the doorframe and said, "Good luck out there, cousin. You'll need it." For the first time, Elena smiled, a calm, knowing smile. "Don't worry, Lila," she said softly. "Luck has nothing to do with what's coming next." She turned, walked down the long marble hallway, and never looked back. The laughter behind her followed her into the night. But this time it didn't burn. It fueled her. The city became her battlefield and her sanctuary. Elena started small, smaller than most people would ever imagine. Her first job after graduation was as a junior assistant at a real estate office, filing paperwork and answering phones. It wasn't glamorous, but she paid attention. Every time a deal was made, every time a contract was signed, she studied the process like her life depended on it. She stayed late, often being the last one in the office when the lights dimmed. She watched how the senior agents talked to clients, how they built trust, how they negotiated. When she didn't understand something, she researched it. When others left for drinks, she stayed back and learned. Months turned into years, and Elena started gaining confidence. She began handling smaller clients, people looking for apartments or rental spaces. She worked with honesty, a quality that set her apart in a business filled with deception. Slowly, her clients began to trust her more than the seasoned brokers. The manager noticed her dedication. "You've got instincts," he said one evening as they closed the office. "Most people chase the money, you chase the meaning." She smiled faintly, but inside she burned with determination. She wasn't chasing meaning or money. She was chasing freedom. By the time she was 28, Elena had already built a modest reputation in the city's real estate market. She wasn't rich yet, but she was respected. And then, her breakthrough came in the form of a deal everyone else thought was doomed. A developer had gone bankrupt in the middle of constructing a luxury building downtown. The property was tied up in legal chaos, and most investors ran away from it. But Elena saw something others didn't: potential. She studied the numbers, the market, the architecture, and the location. It was risky, but if it worked, it would change her life forever. She didn't have the money to buy into the project, but she had a plan. She approached small investors, convincing them to trust her vision. "This building will rise again," she told them confidently. "We just need to believe before anyone else does." People laughed at her. Some mocked her age, her lack of connections, her quiet voice. But a few, just a few, believed. With their help, and every penny of her savings, Elena poured her soul into reviving the project. She worked day and night, dealing with contractors, architects, and lawyers. 2 years later, the building was complete. Elegant, modern, breathtaking. Its glass panels reflected the sky like a jewel in the heart of the city. Investors who once doubted her now lined up for a chance to buy in. The media called her the quiet visionary, the woman who saw gold in ruins. And then came the twist of fate she never saw coming. One morning, during a final inspection of the property before launch, her assistant handed her a list of new tenants who had already reserved apartments. As her eyes scanned the names, one line stopped her cold. Margaret Hall, Unit 1503, Lila Hall, Unit 1504. For a moment, Elena couldn't breathe. Her aunt and cousin, the same people who once mocked her for dreaming beyond her place, were moving into her building. She almost laughed. The universe had a cruel sense of humor, but Elena wasn't angry. She felt something deeper, poetic justice. Her company now owned 60% of the building. She had the final say in every lease, every rule, every detail. Still, she didn't interfere. Let them move in, she decided. Let them think they're at the top. The truth would come when it mattered most. Weeks later, she bought the penthouse, the crown of the tower. The view stretched endlessly over the city, the skyline glittering beneath her. Standing on the balcony, she whispered into the night, "You laughed when I had nothing. Let's see how silent you become when I have everything." From that day on, she lived quietly, keeping her identity as the majority owner private. Her name was never mentioned in front of tenants, just Ms. Lawson, the executive behind the scenes. She didn't crave attention. She wanted the moment, the one where her silence would speak louder than years of mockery. Every morning she passed through the same lobby where she knew they now walked daily, unaware that the woman they once belittled signed their rent checks. Sometimes she saw them from a distance, Margaret still overdressed, Lila still self-absorbed, both of them laughing as if the world owed them its applause. And Elena smiled quietly every time. Success, she realized, wasn't about shouting your triumph. It was about walking through the same rooms where you were once humiliated and owning every inch of them. She had done it, without their help, without their approval, without a trace of their laughter left in her memory, only the echo of her own quiet strength. And soon she would return to that lobby, not as the unwanted niece, but as Ms. Lawson, the woman who built everything they lived in. The day felt different from the very beginning. A soft drizzle misted the streets, the kind of rain that painted everything silver. Elena stood outside the building she had built, her building, holding an umbrella and taking in the sight of its towering glass walls. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, and for a moment she let herself breathe it all in. Years of struggle, heartbreak, and determination condensed into one perfect skyline. As she stepped inside the marble lobby, the familiar scent of polished floors and fresh lilies greeted her. The staff nodded respectfully. They all knew who she was, though few had ever seen her speak much. She liked it that way, quiet, controlled, unseen until the moment mattered. And that moment came faster than she expected. Sitting in the lounge area, near the grand fountain, was her Aunt Margaret, surrounded by two of her well-dressed friends. Lila was next to her, sipping a drink, her laughter sharp and hollow. They hadn't seen Elena yet. Elena walked toward the elevator, her heels echoing softly against the marble. Then she heard it, that voice she would recognize anywhere. "Well, look who it is," Margaret said, her tone dripping with mockery. "If it isn't our dear Elena, still playing dress-up, I see. What brings you here? Looking for a job as the cleaning staff?" Lila giggled. "She's probably visiting a friend. I mean, come on, does she even know this building charges rent?" The word stung for only a second, then dissolved into something lighter. She had imagined this moment 100 times, and yet, now that it was here, she didn't feel anger. She felt calm, almost amused. She turned slightly toward them but said nothing. Her silence unsettled them more than any comeback could have. Margaret smirked, mistaking her quiet for humiliation. "Oh, don't just stand there, dear," Margaret went on. "You might scare the residents. This place isn't exactly affordable." Just then the lobby doors opened and the manager, a well-dressed man in his 40s, hurried out from behind the reception desk. His voice rang through the space, filled with genuine warmth. "Welcome home, Ms. Lawson," he said, smiling. The words hung in the air like thunder. Margaret froze. Her drink tilted in her hand, drops spilling onto her wrist as her eyes darted between Elena and the manager. "Ms. Lawson?" she repeated, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes, ma'am," the manager said cheerfully. "Ms. Elena Lawson, the owner of the Lawson Residences. We've been waiting for your return. Your penthouse has been freshly prepared, and the security team is ready to escort you upstairs." Lila's mouth fell open. Her lipstick-stained glass slipped from her fingers and clinked against the marble floor. Elena turned back toward them, her eyes calm, her expression unreadable. I didn't realize you lived here, she said softly, the faintest smile touching her lips. Margaret blinked rapidly, searching for words. You own this building? Elena nodded politely, among others. But this one is special. It's the first project I ever completed. Silence. Even the fountain's trickling seemed to fade. Margaret's friends shifted awkwardly in their seats, whispering. Lila tried to laugh, but the sound came out choked and uneasy. Oh, I had no idea, Elena. We didn't. Elena lifted her hand gently. It's Miss Lawson here, she said with quiet finality. And don't worry. I never expected you to. She turned toward the elevator as the manager pressed the button for her. The door slid open, reflecting her poised figure in gold. Before stepping inside, she glanced back one last time. Margaret's face was pale, her lips pressed tightly together, her arrogance crumbling under the weight of realization. I hope you're comfortable in your apartments, Elena said softly. If you need anything, my staff will handle it. I'm sure you know how to reach management. And with that, she stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, she caught one final glimpse of her aunt's frozen expression, the drink still trembling in her hand, the mocking laughter long gone. When the elevator began to rise, Elena exhaled slowly. She had imagined shouting, exposing every memory, demanding apologies. But she didn't need any of that. The silence was sweeter, cleaner. It was the sound of victory. When she reached the penthouse floor, the manager opened the door to her home. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the room, offering a breathtaking view of the city she had conquered. The storm clouds had cleared, and the skyline glowed beneath a fading sunset. Elena walked toward the glass, taking off her coat and letting it fall over the back of the couch. Her reflection stared back at her, stronger, older, free. She thought of that night years ago when she had left her aunt's house with a single suitcase. She thought of the laughter, the pity, the whispered insults. And she smiled. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she said, "Welcome home, Miss Lawson." The city twinkled below, and for the first time in years she felt at peace. The laughter that once burned her now meant nothing, because the world that once rejected her now belonged to her. The gala night shimmered with elegance and quiet luxury. The ballroom at the Lawson residences gleamed under 1,000 crystal lights, the sound of soft jazz filling the air as guests in tuxedos and gowns mingled with glasses of champagne. It was the celebration of the building's success, a night to honor its investors, designers, and visionaries. Elena stood by the glass balcony overlooking the city, a vision in a black silk gown. She wasn't the timid girl who once flinched at laughter. She was the woman who built an empire from the ashes of humiliation. Her hair was swept neatly to the side, her expression calm and confident. Everyone who passed greeted her with admiration, respect, even awe. At the other end of the room, Margaret and Lila entered, unaware of what the evening truly represented. They were dressed as they always had been, polished, loud, desperate to impress. Lila clung to the arm of her new fiancé, while Margaret floated from guest to guest, pretending to know people far more important than herself. Then came the announcement. The host stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand, his voice echoing warmly through the ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we celebrate not just a remarkable building, but the incredible woman behind it. Please welcome the visionary, the founder, and the owner of Lawson Residences, Ms. Elena Lawson. The applause thundered across the hall. Heads turned, whispers rose, and Margaret's smile faltered. Lila's fingers tightened around her glass. Elena walked gracefully to the stage, every step measured, her eyes calm. The spotlight followed her, and for a moment she could see her aunt's face in the crowd, pale, stiff, unblinking. Taking the microphone, she smiled softly. "Good evening, everyone," she began. Her voice carried warmth but also quiet power, the kind that silences a room without effort. "I don't often speak at events like this. For years, I was told that I didn't belong in rooms like these, that I should be grateful just to be invited. But tonight, I stand here not as a guest, not as someone seeking approval, but as someone who built her place with her own hands." A murmur ran through the audience. Elena paused, letting her words settle. I built Lawson Residences to be more than a building. It's a symbol of resilience, proof that no amount of doubt can break someone who refuses to stop believing in themselves. I hope this place reminds everyone who ever felt small or unwanted that their story isn't over. Sometimes, the world has to see your strength before it finally understands your worth. The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, investors smiled proudly, and her team beamed from the corners of the hall. But Elena's eyes found Margaret again. The woman who once called her a burden now stood motionless, trapped in the echo of her own words. After the speech, people gathered around Elena to congratulate her. Lila approached hesitantly, her voice small. Miss Lawson, that was beautiful. We had no idea how far you'd come. Elena turned to her, her smile polite but distant. No one ever does, she said softly, until they have to look up to see you. Lila flushed, lowering her gaze. We were young. We didn't mean to. It's all right, Elena interrupted gently. I'm not angry. In fact, I'm grateful. You gave me a reason to become who I am. Margaret joined them, her face tight with forced grace. Elena, dear, you've done so well for yourself. Truly, we're all very proud. Elena's eyes met hers, calm, steady, unreadable. Proud? She repeated. That's generous of you, Aunt Margaret. I remember when you said people like me weren't born for success. Margaret's lips parted, but no words came out. The silence between them stretched like glass, delicate, transparent, about to shatter. Elena leaned in slightly, her voice a whisper meant only for her aunt. You taught me what rejection feels like, and because of that I learned how to never depend on anyone again. So thank you for that lesson. Then she stepped back, her expression soft once more, and turned away as the next group of investors approached. Margaret stood frozen, her face pale, her carefully built arrogance dissolving under the weight of quiet humiliation. Lila touched her mother's arm, whispering, "Let's go home." But Margaret couldn't move. She just stared at Elena, radiant, untouchable, surrounded by people who truly respected her. Later that night, as the guests began to leave and the music faded, Elena returned to her penthouse. She removed her heels and walked barefoot across the cool marble floor, the city lights glowing through the wide glass walls. She poured herself a glass of wine and stood by the window, watching the streets below, the same streets she had once walked with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. Now those same streets glittered beneath her, far below her feet. She thought about her parents, about the girl who once slept in a borrowed room, who worked herself to exhaustion for a dream that no one else could see. She whispered softly into the night, "I made it, Mom. I made it, Dad." The city was silent except for the hum of distant traffic, and somewhere deep inside her, the echoes of old laughter faded completely, replaced by peace. Elena smiled to herself, her reflection glowing in the glass. She didn't need revenge anymore. What she had built was enough, and in that still, shining moment, the woman who once had nothing finally had everything. Not in wealth, not in status, but in dignity. She lifted her glass toward the skyline and said the words that once silenced her aunt and defined her triumph. "Welcome home, Miss Lawson."